B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Thursday, September 17th, 2020. Your humble host took a mental health day yesterday, and it worked. I escaped from the smoky, putrid skies here in the Bay Area, over the coastal range, to the seaside, and met with some friends in a very COVID-safe manner, where when I returned, the skies had virtually cleared up here, and we have much less smoke in the air. The smell of the fire that I've described as sticking your nose into the smokestack of an incinerator has eased. And I just hope that the same conditions soon arrive in Oregon and Washington State. We'll report on the wildfires here shortly. But I open up today with disinformation, misinformation, exaggerated lies. And we have to be very careful at a time like this. We have a dangerous president with a lot of allies who are willing to spew all kinds of nonsense in service of a second term for our stable genius. And as you know, Trump was quick to seize on an incident in Los Angeles, the suburb or the section of town called Compton, last Saturday, when, in an attempt at execution, a still-at-large gunman walked up, or actually kind of jogged up, to a parked police unit, an SUV, with two officers in it. And in a brief sequence of events captured on video, the gunman fired shots at these sitting ducks, a male and female deputy sheriff from the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department. And when those deputies were taken to a nearby hospital, right-wing media sprung into action. And I was initially appalled by what I saw on Facebook that was being promoted by some of my right-wing, air quotes, friends. Because what it said was that a Black Lives Matter protest had broken out outside the hospital where the deputies had been taken. There's video of an African American shouting, "I hope the motherfuckers die." Now, the behavior is unseemly. It's free speech protected by the First Amendment, but I deplore it, as I do deplore the attempted execution of these two cops. But Fox News and Breitbart quickly latched onto the story, and they immediately spread this false notion that it was a significant gathering of BLM activists who were conducting this tirade outside the hospital. Well, let's credit the HuffPost, which I rarely find too exciting these days, and senior reporter Haley Miller, because Haley dug into this and discovered that there were 4 people there. And they had no connection to Black Lives Matter. They're part of a self-styled local group called the Africa Town Coalition. And one of their leaders was willing to be quoted, Kevin Wharton Price. He said, "We've been on some actions with Black Lives Matter, but we have our own political agenda. We are not Black Lives Matter. We are not Antifa." But that didn't matter, because the video had rolled, the video had been uploaded, and it was going viral. And then the sheriff himself, Alex Villanueva, who presides over a department that has been corrupt for years, that just this summer is responsible for 6 officer-involved shootings, and I believe the death toll is at least 5 from those various incidents. He does not operate with transparency, and in fact, Villanueva held a press conference shortly after the shootings, and he blamed Black Lives Matter protesters, saying that their words had created the climate that led to whatever motivated this bad guy with a gun to try to execute those 2 sheriff's deputies. Now, the demonstration at the hospital lasted less than 10 minutes. One of the 4 protesters was arrested, and a journalist with a public radio station who identified herself as press. The sheriff disputes that. It's captured on her own video. And so we have a number of players who are willing to corrupt the information stream for self-serving purposes. It starts with Trump. It's enabled by Fox and other right-wing outlets. Then the MAGA people go on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and spread this trash. And then the sheriff of L.A. County, who has a lot of explaining to do. There are various efforts to investigate his department, and he thwarts them all. And the independence of sheriffs is a two-sided coin and a problem in many jurisdictions across the country. But in sprawling L.A. County, it is a serious problem. And I'm about to explain to you how the city manager of Linwood, which is the community right next to Compton, is now on leave. He has been suspended because of an Instagram post that he put up in response to Saturday's shooting. The man in question here is Jose Ometiatl. And I want to tell you first that before I read this post that apparently outraged many people, number one, Jose Ometiatl, even if I can't properly pronounce his name, has full First Amendment rights. He did this on his own Instagram page. He did not say he was speaking for the city of Linwood. So what he wrote was, "The shooting of anyone is a wholly unacceptable occurrence in society. I do not condone the type of violence seen in the shooting of the deputies yesterday in Compton. I will say that communities like Compton have been plagued by deputy gangs that inflict fear and violence in the community. The fact that someone randomly opened fire on deputies is to be expected in the society we live in today." He went on, "The political climate and leadership of Sheriff Villanueva has only sowed the seeds of anger and frustration in the community. I pray for the deputies and their families while still demanding justice for Andre Guardado, Breonna Taylor, Tamir Rice, Ahmaud Arbery." And he didn't list, I think the guy's name is Frizzy, the one who was shot by deputies after a traffic stop on his bicycle. We still don't know what his vehicle code violation allegedly was. He did run from the officers. He dropped a bundle of clothing. Out of it fell a gun. And then he was shot to death. There was no evidence he was reaching for that gun or attempting to point it at the deputies. And again, I don't condone the violence of this unidentified gunman, but we have to put it in the proper context. And in Los Angeles, the sheriff's department is the enemy of the people, particularly if those people are black or brown. And the lack of accountability, transparency, they still don't have body cams, I believe, in any of the sheriff's offices in L.A. County. They're promising them to roll out next month. And so I support the city manager, and I hope that he is able to hold on to his job. So now let's look at the states of California, Oregon, and Washington. We're starting in mid-August. Lightning strikes led to an incredible number of wildfires breaking out all over the place. We'll get to the real news about the wildfires here after we talk about some of the fiction. And particularly in Oregon, there is a right-wing echo chamber that continues to claim that Antifa is somehow organized to set fires and then to loot communities that have been evacuated? There's absolutely no evidence of this. There are some isolated cases of arson, and let me just briefly run them down for you. Police in Portland arrested a man Monday for allegedly lighting at least 7 small fires in the city, 45-year-old Domingo Lopez. We reported on this the other day. And after he was arrested the second time, this went viral on Twitter. Many sharing a police post in a bid to falsely tie all the West Coast fires to agitators instead of natural causes, electrical lines. We'll detail one of those for you in a moment. And some cases of arson, like that crazy gender reveal party. So I am not disputing that some of the fires are caused by human activity and wayward people in the sense of people who decide to start a fire in the middle of a firestorm. But people have falsely claimed that some of the fires were arson attacks committed by Antifa. Trump promotes this. The fear-mongering has even led some residents to vow to defy evacuation orders and remain in their burning towns in order to defend them. Even the FBI, Trump's FBI, released a statement last Friday making clear that reports of extremists being behind the fires had been investigated and found to be untrue. And arson is not a leading cause of these massive blazes. According to experts, quote, there's virtually no evidence that Antifa caused the wildfires currently burning in Oregon. That is a quote attributed to Erica Fleischman at Oregon State University. The FBI has referenced these rumors as untrue. And a fire investigator named Robert Schall said the number one reason that people light fires, become arsonists, is financial motive. They're in financial distress, and they're trying to get insurance proceeds. And they figure in the middle of a wildfire breakout that they can get away with it. And another primary motive is spite or revenge. And that's the case in Jackson County, that the fire that devastated and leveled Phoenix, Oregon, may be caused intentionally by a guy who's been arrested named Michael Bakella, age 41, a local transient, booked into jail for violating probation. He's been charged with 15 counts of criminal mischief. But he has no connection to any other group. He is a lone monster. And here in California, a woman named Anita Esquivel, age 37, was arrested for starting fires in Salinas, that's near Monterey. No indication she has any ties to Antifa. Clackamas County, Oregon, 2 individuals arrested last Friday on arson charges. A 37-year-old Ignat Shatinin, who confessed to lighting clothes on fire at a local Fred Meyer store using a lighter because he did it to get the attention of a person who wouldn't speak with him. And in Oregon City, Sammy Pyatt was arrested by the police department there for lighting a pile of leaves on fire near a local social services building. He was a homeless guy. The fire was quickly put out. Then we have the news that is breaking today that it's very likely that one of the major blazes, a 170,000-acre holiday farm fire in Oregon along the Mackenzie River, well, the outbreak of that blaze was preceded by a power outage, a loud explosion, and a shower of blue sparks from an electric line near the exact location where authorities say the fire broke out. We have that history here in California, where the Paradise Fire was caused by a high-tension line that fell down because the hook that held it up had not been replaced in 98 years. And from a distance, we have all kinds of armchair experts in social media. And over at Counterpunch, Kevin Matthews, who is described as a an environmental activist from Eugene, Oregon. He said, okay, this flood of forest BS is pissing me off. Hear me. The national reporters helicoptering in have not got this right. And he names NPR and ProPublica. And he posts a video because 6 weeks before this holiday farm fire broke out, he flew over the area. And he knows what he's talking about, apparently, about forest management. And he says, take a look at the clip and ask yourself, is this a landscape overloaded with fuel from not enough forest management? As Trump would say, do they fail to rake the floor of their forests? Is it too much deep, unhealthy forest from excess fire suppression? Did the obvious, massive, unsustainable, and never-mentioned amounts of clear-cutting keep this landscape from burning intensely? And he answers his own questions. No, it didn't stop the burning. The holiday farm fire ripped some 20 miles through this managed landscape in one day. This is an industrialized timber landscape in the heart of Timber Central, Lane County, Oregon, the county that's typically the biggest sawlog-producing county in the biggest sawlog-producing state in the United States. This landscape has been managed, he says, that means logged, to death. In the process, radically accelerating the same runaway climate change that now dries it to tinder. Seriously, he said, NPR reporters helicoptering in go around and quickly ask a bunch of official experts, embedded members of the Oregon Timber Industrial Complex, and then they credulously report the convenient mythologies they're given. He says the U.S. Forest Service is no more believable on forest issues than ICE is on immigration issues. And then we come to the doo-woppers, as I just named them that, right here on the spot. And in this case, DEW is D-E-W, and it stands for Directed Energy Weapons. Now, I have been annually infuriated as we suffer through wildfires here in Northern California year after year. And these so-called experts, self-styled people who spend too much time in front of a computer screen develop these cockamamie theories. And the idea that laser beams, so-called directed energy weapons, are being used to aggravate the fire situation here, to me, is just complete and utter bullshit. And so I was really upset on Tuesday, just before I left for my day off. I got an email from my longtime friend and colleague, Mark Crispin Miller of New York University. And I value the skeptical and sometimes non-mainstream reporting that Miller shares through his News from Underground. But this one was just over the top. Now, let me be fair to Professor Miller. From what I'm about to read you, only the headline, the subject line of the email, was likely written by him. But I have to read it because it, to me, it is disgraceful that a man of his credentials would publish this. He wrote the subject line, "Evidence that California's wildfires have been fed by laser beams." Then he quotes entirely from a colleague of his, I don't know, Mary Rivetti, who writes, "I'm following up on the Dutch since September 9 Twitter post that you published, which I found utterly shocking yet believable. The post claims that laser beams exacerbated California's wildfires. I recently found this article featuring a Dutch since 20-minute YouTube clip dated September 8th, displaying his computer's desktop as he discovers the laser beams over California on that date. The beams are directed at the fires, and the heat intensifies whenever a beam makes contact." So this is linked to an article published on a website I'd never heard of before called darkoutpost.com. I've linked to it, so it's an easy click in the show file for today's podcast at peterbcollins.com. Now, Mac Slavo, who has the byline for what I'm about to read you, which is all highly speculative, and it's just a series of questions, really. His headline reads, "Directed energy weapons seem to be starting fires in California and Oregon." Let me ask you to focus on two words, seem and starting. All right? Because he then shows a video, and I'll play a little audio from that video in a second. But his text reads, "A directed energy weapon was caught on a live stream going right into a fire in California. Then there was another shown igniting a fire in Oregon. Now there's a black censorship line through the beam. What's going on? YouTuber Dutch Since has discovered something unbelievable while looking at the fires in the western United States and studying the earthquakes around the world. When it's first noticed, Dutch Since called it some kind of ray or beam of some kind." Turn the page, and there are several videos posted. And I clicked on them. And what you see is a satellite photo of the western United States at night, where the outline of the state borders has been added so that you get a sense of exactly what geographical area you are looking at. And at a certain point in each video, you will see a beam that lights up, and it looks like it's coming from the sky and aiming at one of the sites where there's already a wildfire on the map. And the fire shows up in a colorful way on the video. So it links to the website for Dutch Since, and then a series of questions. Is this just a coincidence? This happened 2 nights in a row? Is it just a coincidence these beams go into the fires? Is it just a coincidence that there's now a sensor bar over the beams? How many coincidences do we need? If this is not a DEW, D-E-W, what the hell is it? So that is hardly evidence or proof. It's just speculation. Let me tell you that on the page of the Dark Outpost, there are a lot of cheesy clickbait ads with large exposures of boobage. And I consider this content to be the product of boobs, idiots. So let's listen, just as long as you can tolerate here, as long as I can tolerate, to the narrative that comes from Dutch Since.
I don't know what to make of this. We're going to do this live. I need to go look it all over, see what the deal is. We got some kind of ray, some kind of beam, some kind of, I don't know. I don't know what it is. Some kind of ray, some kind of beam, some kind of something. Going to a regional subsector view of here, and we're looking at the natural color fire view. Right. Coming off of this, going up and out, or coming in from this and going down and in. There is no doubt about it.
He's pointing at a coastal
turn
fire.
On your brightness. If you can't see it, you need to go over and look at the image yourself. We're going to go to a regional sector and look here. I do not know what the hell this is.
So, dude. He's already, in his very professional narrative here, admitted that he doesn't know what this is or what's going on. And yet he speculates that there is some high-tech laser beam or other electric signal that is visible to the satellites and that cuts through the screen from one side to the other and ends up pointing at a fire zone. Now, let's be fair. I know a bunch of 15-year-old kids who could create a video like that in about 20 minutes. And if you want to take a very dark interpretation of all this, even in the Trump era, who would have the motivation, the capability, and the opportunity to direct some sort of secret weapon at fires that are already burning? What would be the point? Now, if any of you listening have any actual evidence that could overcome my skepticism, I politely demand to see it. All you have to do is email it to peter@peterbcollins.com. I promise I'll take a look. I'll try to have an open mind. But this is bullshit. And for Professor Miller to be distributing this with his suggestion that this is evidence that DEW were deployed over California, I just find outrageous. Now, one of the things that feeds these kind of people, and I'm not going to use the term conspiracy theorists because I don't think that it even rises to that level. But we now have a military whistleblower who's a member of the District of Columbia National Guard, who said that back there on the 22nd of June, when Trump wanted to clear Lafayette Square and Bill Barr had been put in charge of the military response in Washington, D.C., we are told that Major Adam DeMarco has revealed to a House committee that he received requests from unnamed federal officials asking if they happen to have a heat ray in the arsenal of the D.C. National Guard, and also a very loud, deafening sound system called an active denial system. So DeMarco says he responded that the Guard wasn't in possession of either device. The ADS, that's the noise machine, was developed by the military about 20 years ago, unveiled to the public in 2007. It's not clear, they say, if it's ever been used in combat. The system related to the heat machine emits a directed beam of energy that causes a burning sensation, was considered a non-lethal way to control crowds, particularly when it may be difficult to tell the enemy from innocent civilians in war zones. Use of the device appeared to stall amid questions about whether it actually caused more serious injuries or burns than initially thought. So this fuels the imaginations of people who have access to zippy computers and fast internet connections. And boy, do their imaginations go wild. And in particular, it was just 2 years ago, next month, that many of these same armchair experts were going on social media and saying that, directed energy weapons started the campfire that burned out paradise. And we know it was the faulty hook that held the power line on the PG&E tower. And so it seems like we've gotten into this hall of mirrors. And that's the best metaphor I can come up with. But there's so much fake news out there. And I don't like to use that phrase because it only emboldens Trump. But it's coming from all directions. And I've got to just put out a plaintive plea. Will you stop? Can we stick to the facts? Can we operate in reality? And again, if evidence shows that DEW weapons were deployed, I'll eat the script that I'm holding right here. But until then, call me skeptical with a capital S. All right, so here's a recap of the situation here on the West Coast. We now have 17,000 firefighters in California. We are gaining ground on the August complex fire. It's at 30% containment. Over 800,000 acres burned. That's north of Sacramento. The North Complex fire, I believe that's the Mendocino fire, 220,000 acres. It's now called 36% contained. The fires that are a real challenge are the Creek Fire near Fresno, the Bobcat Fire, which is closing in on Mount Wilson, which is east of Pasadena. Mount Wilson has an observatory, which I think is wood construction, and they've been trying desperately to save it. So far they have. And this account confirms what I told you. People in the Bay Area have been able to enjoy smoke-free skies for the first time in weeks. Today was the first day with no spare the air warning after a record 30 consecutive days. Moving to Oregon, the Beachy Fire east of Salem has burned more than 200,000 acres. It's at 20% containment, but meteorologists are concerned that dry conditions could prime the fires to spread again. It's supposed to get warmer in California. Lightning and storms are expected in Oregon. Also, some may reach as far north as Seattle. And, of course, these come with complex conditions. So the idea of rainfall certainly is appealing because it can put out fires. But if it comes with lightning, it can just start more fires. And heavy rains can cause flash flooding in areas that have been denuded of vegetation and trees. So this episode is not over. And we'll continue to monitor the situation. I do recommend, particularly in Oregon, OregonLive.com is the website of the Oregonian newspaper, and the Seattle Times at SeattleTimes.com. They're both doing a good job covering the fires in their respective areas. So Bill Barr, who I mentioned, took charge in Washington of the militarized response to unarmed protesters. Well, he's gone over the edge. He blasted his own Justice Department prosecutors as a permanent bureaucracy in remarks to the conservative audience at Hillsdale College. He said the notion that line prosecutors should make the final decisions at the Department of Justice is completely crazy. Under the law, all prosecutorial power is invested in the Attorney General, and these people are agents of the Attorney General. As I say to FBI agents, whose agent do you think you are? Now, I don't say this in a pompous way. Well, yes, he did. But that is the chain of authority and legitimacy in the Justice Department. And he likened his junior prosecutors to children in preschool. Letting the most junior members set the agenda might be a good philosophy for a Montessori preschool, but it's no way to run a federal agency. And later, in this talk at Hillsdale, in response to a question about religious services and First Amendment freedoms during the pandemic, Barr said this of the idea of national COVID-19 lockdowns. Other than slavery, which was a different kind of restraint, this is the greatest intrusion on civil liberties in American history. And then, asked about Black Lives Matter, he said they're not interested in black lives, they're interested in props, a small number of blacks who are killed by police during conflicts with police, usually less than a dozen a year, they can use as props to achieve a much broader political agenda. Now, they have eased out, or they took him to the door. Michael Caputo, the guy at Health and Human Services, who we talked about the other day, who on a weekend Facebook Live rant projected all of this potential violence and upheaval on the left. And Bill Barr is joining in that little serenade. And he is also, he went public this week, or somebody did, with the word that the Barr Justice Department had explored whether it could pursue criminal or civil rights charges against Portland city officials, including the mayor, and the same in Seattle up to and including Mayor Jenny Durkan, who's a former federal prosecutor herself. And the idea that Trump and Barr would find a basis to indict elected leaders over the CHOP in Seattle and the 100 nights plus of protesting in Portland is just bizarre. It really is. In addition, Barr has said that he wants his prosecutors to consider charging rioters and others who commit violent crimes at protests with sedition. And as a warm-up for that, They have issued federal arson and attempted arson charges against a 22-year-old Portland man because he lit a fire in a dumpster that was then pushed against a city-owned building during a protest at the Portland Police Bureau's North Precinct. Now, the damage was extremely limited. The building sustained damage in the form of peeling paint, soot deposition, burned plywood affixed to the window, and burn damage to the awning above. Now, this is such a trivial event. And this just shows that they are using the levers of the Justice Department to promote the perception, mostly among Fox News viewers and other right-wingers, that these cities are out of control, and only Trump, who has presided over these disturbances and lengthy protests, only he can fix it with his authoritarian approach. And I got to tell you, I almost drove off the road. On my way to the secret studio this morning, I was listening to Rush Limbaugh, and he basically delivered a rant that was so unhinged, irrational, based on twisted facts, and heavily using the same projection that Trump does, taking his own flaws, faults, and missteps and projecting them onto the other side. And fundamentally, Limbaugh is claiming that it's libtards who are the greatest threat to America. And he went into this whole narrative where Democrats, he said, resent elections. They feel they're just entitled to rule, and it's so bothersome to run campaigns and put up elections when it's Trump, who at one point said he would delay the election. Now he's busy undermining the credibility of the election by attacking voting by mail, by claiming that the only way he can lose is if the election is rigged. Limbaugh indulged in the, Biden equals Black Lives Matter equals looters and anarchists. And then Trump went into the future. He said under Democratic control, they would immediately move for statehood for Puerto Rico and the District of Columbia, so they pile up 4 more Democratic senators. Then, of course, he said they would pack the court by expanding the court to 13 or 14. Now, whatever happens with the Supreme Court, it will never be expanded to an even number. Then he said that Chief Justice John Roberts is the equivalent of a Democrat, and that under his control, the court is just dangerously liberal. Then he went on to say that Democrats will do away with the Electoral College, like they can pass a constitutional amendment with the snap of fingers. And so this whole fear of the left as this threat to the republic, that is the coordinated messaging of the Republicans as they desperately attempt to get a second term for the Donald. And as I watch this is the most dangerous and strange period in my lifetime. I've been commenting publicly on politics since Nixon was in the White House. And I never seen anything like this. So Trump went on Twitter today and told some more lies about mail-in ballots. And Twitter flagged it. Oh, yeah. Isn't that awful? They flagged it. They put a little cover over it, like they used to do with X-rated magazines in the newsstand. It is so lame, and it's so insulting. Because Twitter has alleged community standards. Trump routinely and willfully violates them. But he's good for traffic. So they never actually suspend his account. Or maybe they have fully removed 1 post, maybe 2. But it is so lame. Meanwhile, in Pennsylvania, they followed the lead of Wisconsin, and the state Supreme Court has bounced the Green Party candidates from the ticket. They will not be on the ballot in November. This is the result of Democratic voter suppression schemes. The AP, quote, Democrats have long gone to court to keep Green Party candidates off the ballot, worried that they will siphon otherwise liberal voters in close contests against Republicans in the politically divided state. As I pointed out the other day, the Democrats think they're entitled to Green Party voters' votes. They do not recognize the agency of Americans who do not have to fall in line with one of the two duopolist parties. And this shows how desperate they are, how close they believe it's going to be. And hoisting old Joe Biden over the line requires blocking a third party from participating in democracy. And that is the Democratic Party today. Another ruling from the Supreme Court in Pennsylvania extends the deadline for mail-in ballots to qualify to be counted. They have to arrive by November 6th. That's the Friday after the election. And you know who Dan Coates is? He's a former Republican senator from Indiana. He served under Trump as a kind of toady director of national intelligence. He learned about his dismissal in a tweet, and he took to the pages of the New York Times today to propose a bipartisan election commission. It would be responsible for monitoring those forces that seek to harm our electoral system through interference, fraud, disinformation, or other distortions. Well, start with your former boss, Dan. And I'm not totally opposed to this, but it's never going to happen. The latest to allege that Trump sexually assaulted her is Amy Doris, a former model, said she was invited by Trump along with her boyfriend to watch the U.S. Open tennis tournament from his box in 1997. And I guess despite the presence of the boyfriend, she alleges, he just shoved his tongue down my throat. I was pushing him off. And that's when his grip became tighter. His hands were very gropey and all over my butt, my breasts, my back, everything. I was in his grip and I couldn't get out of it. I don't know what you call that when you're sticking your tongue just down someone's throat, but I pushed it out with my teeth. I think I may have hurt his tongue. The Trump campaign stoutly denies, as usual, the allegations are totally false. And I guess enough of his fools believe that. Oh, yeah, and the looting that has so many Americans concerned is continuing. This is the looting of taxpayer dollars by the Trump family. The latest report from the Washington Post is that this past spring, Trump's golf club in Bedminster, New Jersey, charged the Secret Service $17,000 a month to rent a cottage and other rooms that they couldn't use because the club was closed due to the COVID lockdown. And, you know, these are just the casual corruption antics of Trump and his family. And we are so used to them that it's just background noise today. Every day I pause to thank people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. Great folks like William Silverman, Mary Vaught, Jason Ferguson, and Peter J. Hoffmeister. They each chip in $5, $10, maybe $20 a month, and it helps support the cause here and keeps the lights on at the secret studio. You want to join in? It's easy. Visit peterbcollins.com/sign-up. Well, before I dive into the latest reporting from the extradition hearing in London for Julian Assange, I want to note that the New York Times temporarily lifted its reporting blackout on the Assange hearing. I did a search online. The last published report was on September 7th. It was a setup for the trial. And in a piece published yesterday, September 16th, they reported that the trial is going on. And in a fluffy kind of feature story, they talked about all the technical glitches that have occurred. They actually missed one of them when the one witness accidentally played a video on his computer that was connected to the courtroom. But there's nothing here about what's going on in the trial. Nothing about how this is the most significant potential prosecution that would affect freedom of the press including the New York Times, more than anything in recent history. No mention that the New York Times was collaborating with Julian Assange back in the period of time when WikiLeaks was releasing the war logs from Afghanistan, information about Iraq, including the so-called collateral murder video, the rules of engagement in Iraq that relate to that video. Nope. They just focus on technical glitches that occur. And that is truly sad. But we get good coverage and share it with you. The links are available in the show file for the podcast. Kevin Gostola doing great work at Shadowproof. Joe Laria and his staff at consortiumnews.com. And the detailed work from Craig Murray. And in the interest of time, I'm going to try to summarize some of this for you briefly and encourage you to read those reports if you have not already. Starting with Gostola, he focuses on the testimony of Daniel Ellsberg, which occurred on Wednesday. And Ellsberg dismantled the false narrative that WikiLeaks isn't like the Pentagon Papers that Ellsberg leaked. And Ellsberg said that when he was accused of actually redacting some of the material, he said, "I was afraid if I redacted or withheld anything at all, it would be inferred that I left it out for that there were good reasons that the U.S. was pursuing the Vietnam War." And he was pressed by the lawyers for the United States to explain his reaction to Attorney Floyd Abrams, who published a piece titled "Why WikiLeaks is Unlike the Pentagon Papers." Abrams never talked to Dan Ellsberg about that. And Ellsberg explained why he did what he did with the Pentagon Papers and came across as a pretty strong witness at 89 years old, and despite the fact he started testifying at 6:30 a.m. in the time zone where he lives here on the West Coast. Also, German journalist John Getz was on the stand on Wednesday before Ellsberg, and he addressed the issues that Assange worked very hard to redact names, because one of the series of charges under the Espionage Act is that he didn't properly protect the names of people who were either informants to the United States or collaborators, and that they were then put at risk. But we know that not a single one of those informants has ever been reported to be harmed by the release of their names. We know that the names were actually first released by the Guardian reporters David Lee and the abominable Luke Harding, because in their book they published the password to the archive that allowed Cryptome to get a hold of the material. They then published it unredacted, and WikiLeaks followed suit. So I think that there are some very important issues being raised. And once again, Craig Murray, who is right there in the courtroom, one of the handful of people permitted under the iron fist of the judge, Vanessa Baratzer. And he writes, "Yet another shocking example of abuse of court procedures unfolded Wednesday. James Lewis, the attorney for the prosecution, had been permitted gratuitously to read to two previous witnesses with zero connection to the claim an extract from the book by Harding and Lee, in which Harding claims that at a dinner, Julian Assange had stated that he didn't care if U.S. informants were killed because they were traitors who deserved what was coming." So it's important to note that Mr. Lewis had asked that question of two people who he knew had not attended that dinner. So the best they could give was hearsay testimony. And then when John Getz, the chief investigations editor at German Public TV's NDR, who had been at Der Spiegel at the time, he was one of the four people at that dinner. He was ready and willing to testify that Assange said no such thing. But the judge ruled any questions about that out of order because Mr. Getz had not included that in his written evidence statement, which was submitted before the oral arguments began, and Lewis asked the other two witnesses about Assange's alleged comments at that dinner. So that, coupled with the time limits that Baraitser has imposed, those are just a couple of elements of the clearly biased proceedings that are underway. And Craig Murray goes through the testimony of Dan Ellsberg, notes that during the time that WikiLeaks had the files but hadn't released them, was working on redacting them, that they worked actively with the State Department, and at the time under Obama, P.J. Crowley, a man who I've talked with on many occasions, he was the point man. And they used a New York Times reporter who was part of the consortium at that point to contact the State Department, and they were turned down when they asked for guidance in redaction. That may have been a trap that is being sprung on Julian Assange right now. So it is fascinating. It is utterly inexcusable that the corporate media in this country is completely ignoring these proceedings. Presumably, they'll do a wrap-up at the end of the hearing, when I would safely predict that Julian Assange will be ordered to be transferred into U.S. custody. The closing comment from Murray on Wednesday: the court heard a great deal more truth than it could handle today, and great effort was put into excluding more truth. The U.S. government succeeded in preventing Getz eyewitness contradicting their promulgation of Luke Harding's lie about what Assange said at the restaurant. The U.S. government also objected successfully so far to evidence coming from Khalid El-Masri. He was the German citizen who was, under what we later learned was a mistaken identity, who was picked up by the U.S., subjected to rendition. He was tortured. And then Condoleezza Rice said, oops, we got the wrong guy. And Getz had investigated that and determined that there were 13 Americans responsible for his rendition. Craig Murray describes how he exposed the rendition and was told that it wasn't happening. This is back in, 2004, 2005. So this whole thing is built on a web of lies. And, again, it is a very critical proceeding that is being ignored by the very news organs that benefited from their early publication of WikiLeaks materials and have now decided that Julian Assange doesn't matter. And they do so at their own peril. Truly sick. Well, the other day I scratched my head and say, why isn't the New York Times reporting on this claim from a woman who worked as a nurse at the Irwin County Detention Center in Georgia, an immigrant detention facility run by a private company called LaSalle Corrections? And so yesterday they finally did publish a story about it, citing the nurse Dawn Wooten and saying that the New York Times has been unable to verify her claims, which are that many women were subjected without their consent or their full knowledge to hysterectomies. These are forced sterilizations. And we have at least 3 cases where attorneys are supporting these claims. And one of the women who has been given the fake name Pauline was on a flight, actually on the plane yesterday, and about to be deported when Washington State Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal raised the red flag, got, I think, 170 members of the House to sign on to a letter, and ICE actually removed the woman from the plane. Jayapal said, we need her to testify. This story sends a chill through any woman. And they have named the suspect who conducted these unauthorized surgeries. His name is Mahendra Amin, an obstetrics and gynecology specialist from Douglas, Georgia. His lawyer says the client vehemently denies the charges. But I direct you to a very well-written piece by Natasha Leonard, who's one of the better reporters at The Intercept. Her report is headlined "The Long Disgraceful History of American Attacks on Brown and Black Women's Reproductive Systems." And she notes the rightful fury over these claims originating from Georgia. But she says if these are proven true, they would be extensions of, not aberrations from, a wholly American practice of sterilizing populations deemed undesirable. And she digs up the ugly history, including right here in the Golden State of California, where we had the Asexualization Acts, which led to 20,000 men and women losing reproductive capacity. And that was in the mid-20th century, roughly running from the late 30s into the 1950s. But it resurfaced because an investigation in 2013 showed that at least 148 female inmates in 2 California prisons were sterilized between 2006 and 2010. That's when Arnold Schwarzenegger was our governor. Many of the women said they were coerced into the procedure. In other news, Nancy Pelosi is holding firm as members of her caucus kind of sell out and try to come up with some compromise to get some relief funding out before Congress adjourns for the election. Pelosi is holding firm at the $2.2 trillion level, saying it's hard to see how we can go any lower when you see the great needs. And the Democrats have shown a willingness to compromise, but Mark Meadows says that she is just delivering an ultimatum. So no movement there, and the fight goes on. I was pleased to see that New Jersey has passed a wealth tax, a so-called millionaire's tax. It would increase state taxes on income over $1 million by 2 percentage points. And it also includes an annual rebate of up to $500 for families making less than $150,000. This is socialism, friends. This is a blatant transfer of wealth from the rich to the not-so-rich. And guess who's going to sign this bill? Governor Murphy, who is a former Goldman Sachs executive, Philip Murphy. And California legislators, you know, we have all Democratic control. They dodged any effort to tax the wealthy in this state. They are still hoping for a bailout from Washington. And I want to note a rare victory for National Nurses United. This is the nurses union that I've done some consulting work for in the past. And they are very creative, they're dedicated and persistent. And in a right to, what do we call that? The official name is Right to Work state, and I say right to work for less. 1,800 nurses in Asheville, North Carolina, at Mission Hospital, will now be represented by the union NNU. And this is HCA Healthcare, the company previously run by Senator Rick Scott of Florida. And before that, I believe it was owned by the family of Tennessee Republican Senator Bill Frist. Here's today's COVID-19 update, edited by Linda Lewis. We are showing on the global scoreboard, if you will, almost 30 million confirmed cases, with 940,000 worldwide deaths attributed to coronavirus. In the U.S., the case count is now estimated at 6.6 million, and the death toll reported is 196,802. So we're closing in on the 200,000 number that was predicted for early October. Now, you've heard me talk a lot about the troubling manipulation, massaging of the data related to COVID-19. We now have a leaked internal memo from FEMA that says it's revealing a 17% spike in coronavirus deaths in the past week. And this is something I've been very concerned about. I've told you how the daily numbers fluctuate in ways that don't make sense, and that since Trump diverted collection from the CDC to a private firm from a donor in Pittsburgh, I have not trusted this information. ABC News obtained the memo that showed that the trend in new deaths has shot way up since the start of September. It said that almost 6,000 coronavirus deaths were recorded from September 9th to 15th. That is a 16.6% increase compared with the week before. And yesterday, Robert Redfield, who is the head of the CDC, he was testifying on the Hill. He was asked, why Trump won't wear a mask and why Trump keeps saying that there is a vaccine right around the corner. Weeks, he says, just weeks away. Well, Redfield said that any vaccine will not be in full distribution until sometime next year. He said the second or third quarter, that's the summer of 2021. And I think he exaggerates here just a bit, but he said wearing a mask could be more effective than a vaccine at keeping the pandemic at bay. If I don't get an immune response from the vaccine, it's not going to protect me. This face mask will, he said. And then Trump intervened and said, hey, I think he's mistaken about that. And he was upset both about the mask comment and about the realistic timeline for a vaccine. Trump said we're going to have a vaccine within months at most. Now, this is just more blue sky bullshit from the guy who is so badly mismanaged this whole episode. And Redfield testified that while limited doses for high-priority people could be available within months, its widespread availability to people everywhere wouldn't come until next summer or fall. So, Trump is just blatantly and brazenly politicizing this whole process. And I'm not going to get in line for a vaccine, and many people who are more pro-vaccine than I am have the same concerns. And to his credit, Biden has been exploiting this in recent speeches. And the clips that I've seen, he's pretty coherent and pretty persuasive about it. And also yesterday or the day before, I'm not sure, but Trump, I think it was Tuesday evening, he did an interview with ABC's George Stephanopoulos in a town hall kind of program. And Trump, he was trying to talk about herd immunity. And he said that the virus is going to disappear because of a herd mentality. Now, that's a pretty interesting Freudian slip. And Trump just continues to bluster, quote, and you'll develop a herd mentality. It's going to be herd development, and that's going to happen. That'll all happen. But with a vaccine, I think it'll go away very quickly. And Trump's ignorance and equal parts arrogance on full display there. And Linda has the details on the leave of absence, a medical leave that has been announced by Michael Caputo, Trump's buddy who was working over at the HHS as kind of a snitch. And after that weekend Facebook Live rant, he's going to take off 60 days to focus on his health and the well-being of his family. So he's out of the picture until after the election, when all the Republicans believe that the coronavirus will disappear because it's just a concoction of Democrats to make Trump look bad and weaken his re-election prospects. Interesting that last week the pharmaceutical companies that could be participating in vaccine development or distribution all published full-page ads pledging that this code of safety. Well, that's just PR. Because in the case of AstraZeneca, the morning after they learned that a clinical trial had been halted because one patient had experienced serious neurological symptoms, and the details on that appear to be potential paralysis, AstraZeneca basically gave information to investors in a meeting organized by J.P. Morgan, but they haven't gone public with the details. Pfizer, another front runner in the vaccine race, announced on Saturday that they want to expand their clinical trial to include thousands more participants, but we don't have any details about that plan and how they can do it on a rush basis. And we also have to look at, Pfizer said they would expand to 44,000 from the current goal of 30,000, but this has raised new questions about how the company could know the results by its goal of the end of October. I want to recommend a great expose published at the Columbia Journalism Review showing that Bill Gates has been able to use his foundation dollars to buy favorable coverage, glowing coverage, from NPR, BBC, NBC, Al Jazeera, ProPublica, National Journal, The Guardian, Univision, Medium, Financial Times, The Atlantic, The Texas Tribune, Gannett, Washington Monthly, Le Monde, and the Center for Investigative Reporting, to name a few. And it's a highly detailed piece. I encourage you to check it out. I think it has important implications. There has been a lot of Bill Gates bashing recently. Most of it is well-deserved. I don't see him quite as the Dr. Evil that some extreme depictions of him suggest. But I think that his wealth and influence need to be fully exposed, and this article is a step in the right direction. That's our news and comment podcast for today. Thanks for listening. You can share it with absolutely everyone. You'll find it on YouTube. And I remain Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.